Hello everyone, I wanted to jump in for the last time this semester, and this time it's to talk about logical fallacies and propaganda. You'll be reading more about this in Chapter 8. I thought I'd give you a quick introduction because these are some pretty complex concepts, and Carter just introduces them to you, and you might feel that you don't quite have them mastered until you hear about them and think about them a little bit more. So let's start by defining what a logical fallacy is. It's an error in reasoning. So if someone is making an argument, they've given their claim, they're providing pieces of evidence, and they provide a reason, and that reason has a problem. It has an error in logic. It's illogical. Then we have to discount that certain piece of evidence and not count it towards supporting the claim. The problem is logical fallacies often sound really convincing. So you have to be thinking about, is this logical, and what makes a statement logical all the time? So what's propaganda then? Well, propaganda is a related concept, and there's a lot of overlap between logical fallacy and propaganda. But they are separate ideas. Logical fallacy is usually unintentional. The person who is making the argument usually doesn't realize that they've made an error in reasoning. Also, logical fallacy usually refers to one specific author in one specific argument. On the other hand, propaganda is purposely trying to manipulate the audience. It goes beyond persuasion to the idea of being controlling, and it's generally perceived as a bad thing. For example, advertisers can use propaganda to try to convince people to spend money. Or governments can use propaganda to try to influence people in a specific way. They know they're doing it. They're aware that they're trying to get something from people for their own purposes. All right, so that kind of explains a little bit about how they're different. And next I'm going to talk to you about 15 different types of logical fallacy, and some of these can be used as propaganda as well. Before we do that, very quickly, the word fallacy comes from Latin fallere, meaning to deceive, to trip, or lead into error, or to trick. The word also comes from the Greek phallos, meaning deceitful. The first type of logical fallacy we're going to talk about is bandwagon. Bandwagon is when someone offers up as a reason, you should think this or do this because everyone else is, because the majority of people feel this way. And while that might be true, it's not considered to be logical proof. Sometimes the majority is wrong, and this is also called the appeal to popularity. Little interesting trivia on how this got its name. Back in the 1800s, politicians used to travel in these wagons and make speeches. And if people agreed with them, they would get very excited from the music of the band playing in the speech, and they would jump up onto the bandwagon, or they would follow the bandwagon around town. So if everyone else is doing it, if that's the reason being given, then that's a logical fallacy. You know, I can just hear my dad saying, well, just because everyone else is doesn't mean you have to follow the crowd. And boy, he was talking about the bandwagon approach. Another kind of logical fallacy is called the slippery slope. Think of a ski slope. You start gradually going fairly slow and then it drops and you gain speed and zip down to the end. So a slippery slope logical fallacy is this idea that if you take one step in a certain direction, that step will lead to catastrophe. For example, if you say, if you don't stop smoking, the next thing you know, you're going to be doing hard drugs. Well, that goes from one step in the wrong direction very quickly to disaster, doesn't it? Another example would be we need to get rid of all kinds of nuclear energy, or the next thing we'll be having a nuclear war and blowing the earth up. Well, that may be true, but it goes from one small step to very quickly to catastrophe. So that's the slippery slope. It's an error in logic. Another error in logic is appeals to authority. This is related to testimony. Testimony is a type of evidence where an expert makes a statement supporting the author's point of view or their claim. Now that's great, but sometimes people use someone famous or someone in authority and try to use them as an expert offering testimony, and that doesn't work. That's an error. Like if Oprah makes an advertisement supporting Weight Watchers, and we argue that, well, if it works for Oprah, then it must work. It must be a great program. And, maybe it is, but that is a logical error. Now, Oprah is an expert in media and interviewing, but she is not a dietitian or a nutrition. She could offer a single case study of Weight Watchers working, but she can't be called upon as an authority in that field. Another type of logical fallacy is card stacking. It's a fallacy of omission. It's when you only present your side of the story and ignore evidence out there that doesn't support your opinion. You give all the things on your side, but ignore the other side. And it comes from playing cards and cheating. When people would stack the deck, they would put all the high playing cards so that one person would get them and win. So in argumentation, if you only play the good stuff and you ignore all the bad stuff or all the contrary stuff, that's called card stacking, and it's a logical fallacy. Hasty generalizations. You see this a lot. It's when conclusions are made through insufficient evidence. If you only have a few examples of something, you cannot generalize it. So, for example, if the last two famous mass murderers that have been in the news were from Michigan, we can't conclude that people in Michigan are dangerous. There's just a few people in the midst of thousands. Statisticians call that the N, the number of examples, and you can't have too small an N or you make a bad conclusion. Here's a few more. Begging the question, A is true because A is true. It's a circular argument. You're not really giving a reason, you're just repeating your statement in different words. Like chocolate is healthy because it is good for you. Good for you and healthy are the same thing. You're giving a reason that just repeats the claim. Straw man is a fallacy of distraction. It comes from the idea of building like a straw image of your opponent in attacking that instead of your opponent. So if someone gives an argument and you misrepresent it and attack the misrepresentation, or you try to distract someone from the major claim, that could be called a straw man fallacy. Another type of fallacy is appeal to pity or fear. It's when you try to make someone's emotions override their sense, their logic. And this is a joke, by the way. National Lampoon makes fun of things. And in this magazine cover, they're not serious. They're making fun of people who appeal to pity to try to convince you. It says, if you don't buy this magazine, we'll kill this dog. No, no dogs were harmed. Another type of fallacy is AdHominem, Latin for to the man. It's when someone makes an argument and then you attack the person making the argument instead of the argument itself. So if Mary's trying to tell you something about a car and you say, Mary, I'm not going to listen to you. You don't even know how to do math. Well, that's an AdHominem. You're attacking Mary in a different area that has nothing to do directly with cars. Here's a visual AdHominem. Someone is calling our ex-president a chimp in a derogatory way, and that's an error. Calling someone a name is a logical fallacy. Instead, you should attack the arguments, not the person giving them. A 10th type of logical fallacy is called NonSequitur. That's where we have a deductive argument, but there's a problem in one of the pieces. Like, men are human, Mary is a human, therefore Mary is a man. We've got a breakdown in the logic here. Mary is human is not a specific enough example. You can see that this argument just is not working. Mary could be a man, but she could be a woman. She could be a dog. We just don't know. Non-sequitur is when there's a problem with a deductive argument. Faulty cause and effect is when someone says something, causes something else to happen, and they're not necessarily related. So if you say, because we've been in business 50 years, we're the best, well, that's a faulty cause and effect. There's a lot of reasons you could have been in business 50 years. Maybe you're dishonest. Maybe 50 years is not a very long time in the business you're in. It does not necessarily result in you being the best. Number 14 is the either-or fallacy, also known as the false dilemma, where you split something into two different options and you don't consider all the other options in between. For example, if someone says you must use the D2L Pulse app or you're going to be disorganized. Well, that's an either or. You have other choices between using the app and being disorganized. Maybe you stay organized in another way. Maybe you have another calendar system that helps you remember due dates. So watch out for situations where there only appear to be two options according to the argument, but there might be others. Next, we have post hoc, which is similar to faulty cause and effect, but it has a little piece that has to do with time. This might be correlation without causation. So remember, as you're looking at the ideas of logical fallacy and propaganda, and as you read chapter 8, that they do have some overlap, and You might even want to do a little research of your own to help you further understand these ideas.